and welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to cover the Paladin's Oath of the Crown class specialization from the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, providing a brief description of the subclass, as well as explain and set up the various features gained. Paladins are a stoic group who guard society against the threats that try to tear down civilization, and these paladins are a prime example of those who fulfill that role. As guardians of the realm, their goal is to uphold the laws and serve the people that make up society in ways that allow civilization to continue to progress without falling back to a lawless nature. They are the people who line the walls of great cities, patrol the lands against the perils of nature, and search out and destroy those organizations who look to take control of the lawful for selfish means. The Paladin is a knight who swears an oath to the tenets of the crown in this case, and as such, that oath binds them and grants them their abilities, both magical and fantastic. Those tenets can be found on the information sheet right here, and if your character happens to violate one of these tenets, then you might be looking at some consequences. Paladins will swear these oaths at level 3, however, they must have proven that their oaths are worthy of being able to be sworn in such a nature. This means that as a dungeon master, I'm going to be closely monitoring your character from levels 1 through to level 3 to ensure that they've abided by all of the oaths that they intend to take, specifically these tenets, and if so, are thus allowed to take the oath in question, in this case, the Oath of the Crown. This is one of the few class specializations that has a defined process in order to determine what happens in the event a paladin breaks their oath, either by choice or unwillingly. And you can find what happens in that process by scrolling down to the bottom portion of this particular listing here about breaking your oath. For those who broke their oaths unwillingly, the crown is going to most likely place a quest of penance on that particular paladin, and if that quest is completed to the crown's satisfaction, might allow the paladin to retain their status. However, for those who break it knowingly, the dungeon master is going to initiate a fallen paladin event, where the crown is going to strip that paladin of their status, and the deity who gave their paladin their powers is going to cast them down, forcing them to become an anti-paladin. However, I have already explained how that process works, and I highly recommend that you check out the anti-paladin video if you're interested in understanding that process a little bit better, and I'll be sure to link that video in the description below so that you can more easily access it. For now, let's apply our level 3 to our second level paladin here so we can begin to take a look at the various features that our character is going to gain. When your character selects this class specialization, there's going to be a number of spells that your character is going to gain over time, with 2 of them being granted right at level 3. These spells are called oath spells, and they do not count towards your total list of known spells or prepared spells, and they will always be set up as a prepared spell inside of your character's action sheet. These cannot be swapped for any other spell as they are granted by the oath itself, be it by the crown or via the deity the crown itself is supposedly linked to if one happens to exist. They will still use a spell slot in order to cast them, however, but they will otherwise be available for your character whenever you need to use them. Initially, your character is going to gain the Command and Compel to duel spells, but new spells will be added at levels 5, 9, 13, and 17, and that's not a character level, that's your Paladin level that allows you to gain those spells. However, for the sake of expediency, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a single power group here, or spell group, and then I'm going to add in all of these individual spells so that you can see how that process works. So let's begin. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down here until I can access my spells listing that I already have in place. I'm then going to drag the command spell into that and then alter the grouping for this particular spell, and I'm going to call it Oath of the Crown Spells. What this is going to do is convert that into a power group, not a spell group, and create a brand new section within your character's action sheet here. And I'm just going to minimize those. Actually, this one I can just simply get rid of. I'll do that later. Anyway, I want to ensure that this is a spell group. I also then want to ensure that this is configured for charisma because that is what a paladin uses for their base spellcasting stat. I can then drag in the other spell that I want to be able to add at this particular level. And that is because once I do that, a spell will automatically drop itself into the group you drag it into. So if I had dropped it into here, it would have become part of the Paladin group here. This next step that I'm about to do, you would usually do at a much later level, i.e. at Paladin level 5, and then again at levels 9, 13, and 17. What I want to do is I'm going to grab this spell here and drag and drop that into place there. And what we'll see is that a new linked spell group is going to be created for level 2 spells. I can then grab Zone of Truth and drop that into there. Now, what do I mean by linked? Well, you'll notice that we have our ability score already set up here, or our ability stat, I should say, and that is Charisma. That's because this spell group dictates the settings for this spell group and any other spell group that is directly linked to this spell group. And it doesn't matter whether we add a spell to here or to here. If we drag in, say, our 3rd level spell, we're going to get another linked spell group, and all of these will chain back up to the grouping associated with level 1. This means that as I add new spells, they're already going to be pre-configured in order to set up the spell limitations and or abilities that are going to come into play. And there we go. So we now have 5 spell groups that are all linked to one another. The other advantage of a linked grouping is that if I have to change this stat for some reason, what will happen is that the other groups that are linked to it will change. However, this group won't. You'll see that that is still Charisma. So I'm going to set this back to Charisma just so that we have that properly configured. And that is essentially all you need to deal with in relation to your oath spells. Also at level 3, your character is going to gain the Channel Divinity feature, which contains 2 options that we can add to your character. The first is called Champion Challenge, which allows your character to use a bonus action to compel other creatures to focus all of their attacks solely on your character. Those creatures that are within 30 feet of where your character is standing and is visible to your character must make a wisdom-based saving throw in order to avoid the compulsion. But if they fail, they will always do their best to remain within 30 feet of where your character stands. They will be otherwise unaffected if they happen to manage to succeed on their saving throw, and if your character happens to become incapacitated or dies, all of the effects will go away on those creatures that manage to fail their saving throw. It is also possible that an affected creature will have their effects drop if they are involuntarily moved more than 30 feet away from your character. The second option is called Turn the Tide, and it grants your character as a bonus action the means to heal several creatures who are all within 30 feet of your character and can hear your character. The amount healed is going to be equal to your character's Charisma modifier plus 1d6, with a minimum of 1 point being healed. However, all of the selected creatures must have less than half of their actual total number of hit points in order for this effect to kick in. Setting up this group isn't overly complicated, but it is a little bit tricky simply due to the fact that we want to ensure that these 2 options are linked to one another. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop this into place and create a new power group called Channel Divinity. I am then going to rename this one to simply be Champion Challenge. And before I add in Turn the Tide, I want to ensure that I also modify this particular power group to both use our Charisma ability score, and we want to set up a usage limitation, and it's going to be once for a short or a long rest. I am then going to drag and drop this back into place and set up an additional element here. I'm going to call this Turn the Tide. And I'm going to move this into Channel Divinity. And what that's going to do is that's going to link both of these particular abilities here to this particular power group, and they're going to link the usage here so that if one is used, the other can no longer be used until you've completed that short or long rest. I'm now going to go ahead and clean up the duplication of the effects that we have here. First off, Champion Challenge is the saving throw, so we want to remove the action for the heal. Turn the Tide is the heal, which means we want to remove the action for the saving throw. And apparently, this Paladin doesn't have that great of a charisma stat. There are a couple of additional changes here. You might have noticed that this heal is actually on self. That's actually not supposed to be the case. It can work on your character, but can also work on a bunch of others as well. The other thing is that Champion Challenge doesn't really have any way to indicate to the Dungeon Master that their attacks should be focused on a specific character. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new effect action, and this is simply informative. I'm going to call it Champion Challenge and just simply state focused attacks. And I'm going to leave everything else set as it is. And I'll show you why this is going to work the way that I want it to in a moment. But that completes the setup of these 2 features. So how this is going to work is reasonably straightforward. In relation to the Turn the Tide option, I'll cover this first because it's a little less complicated. All you as a player have to realize is that this cleric is definitely over the 50% mark when it comes to the total number of hit points that they can suffer. That means that you can choose to affect this particular creature or target with a heal. So if you drag and drop that onto place, it will go ahead and heal them up those few points. You've now burnt your use of Turn the Tide, but there are other creatures within that zone of influence, including your own character, that can also benefit from this. So it's not just that one character at that particular point in time that can benefit from that. If the cleric, the monk, the druid, and your own character are all under that 50% mark when it comes to the healing, all of them can be affected by this capability. When it comes to Champion Challenge, however, the way that this is going to work is that you're going to force multiple targets to attempt a wisdom-based saving throw. And if they happen to fail, which in this case this dragon succeeded, it's a dragon, of course it's going to succeed, whatever. I'll still use it as the example. If they happen to fail, then what's going to essentially happen is that they're going to focus all of their attacks on your character, and they're going to do their very best to remain within 30 feet of where your character is standing. So to tell the Dungeon Master that this particular white dragon would be affected had they actually failed their saving throw, you drag and drop that effect there, and you expand the effects listing here in the combat tracker so that you gain access to this menu. What you then want to do is drag this up to your character so that it tells the Dungeon Master that that's focused attacks on the Paladin. That way, once this particular effect is in place, the Dungeon Master now has their cue to indicate that that particular creature should focus on the Paladin. Now, there's one other thing that I want to point out in relation to Champion Challenge. If you read through this description, you will realize that an affected creature does not gain the ability to attempt another wisdom-based saving throw during the end of their turn or beginning of their next turn or whatever. They are stuck with this effect in place unless they are involuntarily moved 30 feet away from where your character is currently standing. So if your character moves more than 30 feet away from them, then that effect is going to drop. However, that's the only way that that effect can drop beyond your character becoming incapacitated or dies. At Paladin level 7, your character is going to gain the Divine Allegiance feature, which allows your character to use a reaction when a creature who is within 5 feet of your character suffers damage. Through this reaction, your character will magically transfer their own health to the damaged creature and absorb the damage they themselves took. For instance, if an ally of your Paladin suffered 12 points of necrotic damage, your character would transfer 12 hit points to that ally, and your own character would suffer the 12 points of necrotic damage instead. But there is nothing that can reduce that damage by any means because it's bypassing all of your character's defenses. This means that if you choose to absorb that damage, you are willingly taking that damage in, thus you are willingly allow it to pass through all of your magical defenses. And while this doesn't necessarily require setup within the actual action sheet here, I'm going to go ahead and do that anyway, because we want to cue to the Dungeon Master that we have actually done so. And I'm going to call this Oath of the Crown. However, the best approach to handle this situation is just to indicate to the Dungeon Master that you're using your reaction. That way, instead of the damage being applied to the original target, it will be applied to you, and the Dungeon Master just drag and drops the results of that roll onto your character rather than the creature that was hit. And the reason why I've set this up in here is simply to indicate to the Dungeon Master that you're going to execute that reaction as part of the transaction history here, or the chat history, if you will. And that way, if they decide to create some form of story element around this particular chat log, they can do so and know that something happened here that allowed you to take that damage versus going, why did that person take the damage, not this person? So I've gone ahead and set up a very brief combat scenario here. Now, it's slightly unrealistic because there's a very good chance that this Kotal would not attack a cleric, but I'm just looking for the effects to come into play because there is something here I want to demonstrate in relation to these other effects. I'm going to make a bite-based attack. That is going to be a miss, so let's roll again just to get a hit there. Perfect. That is now a hit. You, as the Paladin character, would go through and indicate to the Dungeon Master, hey, I'm taking that damage. Okay, so you've now executed that in the chat log. The Dungeon Master is going to pick up the damage dice and roll this on your character. Thus, your character is going to suffer that damage. Now, this is the confusing part, because when this particular attack connects, that's going to trigger a saving throw. Well, here's the thing. Your character took the damage, but they didn't take the attack. This means that the cleric still has to make the saving throw and deal with any of the effects of that saving throw. So they are now unconscious and they are poisoned for a 24-hour period. That's what's going to happen here. Your character is not going to suffer those effects, but they will definitely suffer the damage. However, there are some dungeon masters out there that will rule that because your character is magically transferring that damage to your character, they would also transfer over the effects associated with it. But because there's no specific description as part of that particular information sheet around those effects, and it specifically states that you're suffering the damage, I would rule that that's not the case. But however your DM rules is essentially what you're going to have to accept, so be prepared for either scenario. At Paladin level 15, your character is going to gain the Unyielding Spirit feature, which is a simple feature that grants your character advantage on any saving throw being used to avoid paralyzation or stun-related effects. The problem is that Fantasy Grounds Unity does not have the means to check on incoming effect types until after the saving throw has been made. In this case, that means you're going to have to manually enable the advantage button down here in the bottom left corner of the screen prior to you making that saving throw. And the other reason for that is also because it can be any one of your stats here that is being required in order to resist either of those effects. And what I mean by that is paralyzation-related effects sometimes require a willpower or a constitution-based saving throw in order for you to be able to resist those rolls. Well, you don't know which roll you're going to be required to make until that roll is requested. So the best approach for you as the player is going to be as follows. As soon as the Dungeon Master declares that your character needs to make that saving throw, what you as a player need to do is ask the Dungeon Master, hey, is the effect going to be either a paralyzation or a stun-related effect? Because if that's the case, I have advantage on that particular saving throw. And at worst, they're going to say, no, none of those effects are going to be applied. At best, they're going to say, yes. Then you get to click your advantage button and make that saving throw roll. And because it's literally that straightforward, I really don't think I need to demonstrate how that's going to come into play. However, you might also have a Dungeon Master that goes, what feature is granting you that ability? For that case, you're going to want to ensure that this is part of your action sheet so that you can do two things. One, you can click this to show that you're using it, and two, you can just simply drag and drop that into place in order for the Dungeon Master to be able to pop that open and read through the description so that they can confirm whether that's going to be the case or not. The final feature your character is going to gain is called Exalted Champion, and this is going to happen at Paladin level 20. This feature has a number of effects that can come into play and be granted to your character, and those who actually remain within 30 feet of where your character stands for a total period of 1 hour. The first benefit is that your character is going to gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage that is caused by non-magical weapons, and this is going to last for the entire 1 hour duration unless your character happens to be incapacitated or killed within that 1 hour duration. The second benefit is that your character's allies are now going to have advantage on death-based saving throws while your character is standing within 30 feet of where their character has fallen. And yes, it is possible for your character to move about the battlefield to move within range of that particular character that is about to make a death saving throw during your turn. Unfortunately, what that does mean is that you can only do that on your turn, so you literally are going to have to pick and choose which character you're going to grant that advantage on. The last benefit is that your character and your allies are all going to have advantage on all wisdom-based saving throws, and once again, this is as long as everyone is within 30 feet of where your character is currently standing. So, because of this, we have a number of things that we're going to have to go through and take a look at to make sure that they are set up. And unfortunately, none of them actually are. So that's going to be a problem. Luckily for you, I have already gone through and pre-created some effects here. The first we're going to go through and do is set up the ability for your character to resist the damage. I'm going to call it Exalted Champion, semicolon, resist with all in capital letters, colon, and then the different damage types. And then I'm going to have a not magical at the end, because what that means is that it will be resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, but not to anything that's coming in through a magical weapon. This is only going to be on your target, and it's going to last for 1 hour. And it doesn't expend. The second effect that I want to set up is the advantage on the death-based saving throw. And that is actually fairly straightforward. All you have to do is this. I've called it, once again, Exalted Champion. That should be a semicolon, not a colon. And it's literally just ADV death. That is all it is. What this is going to do is grant a character who is currently dying advantage on their death-based saving throws. There's no expiration on the duration, there's no expenditure, and there is no targeting here in the sense that whether it's on yourself or on a target. All that has to happen is that your character has to be within 30 feet of where they are. Now, Fantasy Grounds doesn't have a check for that, so it's going to have to be managed by yourself and the Dungeon Master, as well as the player character making the death-based saving throw. I suppose we could theoretically put that 1 hour duration on there, but I'm hoping that with the advantage on the death-based saving throw, that's not required, because there's no guarantee that your character remains within that 30-foot reach. So it's best to just simply leave this as it was. And finally, the last effect is the advantage on the wisdom-based saving throws. So what I want to do is just simply pop that open, and I'm going to call it Exalted Champion once again, and it's going to be ADV SAV, colon, and then wisdom. And this is, again, going to be something that can be applied to a particular character or creature. I will, however, set up an expiration so that it expires after the next action, because you don't want that sitting around. There's no guarantee they're going to remain within that particular sphere of your 30-foot reach around you. So, to explain how this is going to work, I've gone ahead and set up, once again, a very quick combat scenario here. You're going to declare that you're going to use Exalted Champion, which means that your character immediately gains resistances to these things. And let's say that your cleric is already down. They've been knocked down to 0 hit points, and they're currently unconscious. This means that they are essentially making death-based saving throws. Your character is within 5 feet of where they're standing. That means that you can drop the advantage on the death save there. Now, if their turn happens to come around, and I will pop up the scaled monitor here for you, what'll happen is that they will now roll 2 dice as opposed to just the 1. Ironically enough, both dice rolled a 2. That means that they failed. But let's say the turn has come around, your character is still within reach, and you pass that token. They're going to roll again. Once again, it's going to be 2 dice, and they have now, unfortunately, even with advantage, managed to fail that death saving throw. Let's do this again, just to be sure. And this time, they managed to succeed. So you can see how that advantage on the death-based saving throw is going to come into play. When it comes to the wisdom-based saving throws, let's say that your entire party is within where your character is standing. So I'm going to go ahead and target all of our allies here. And I'm going to drop this effect into place on all of those characters simply due to the fact that they now have the advantage on the wisdom saving throw. They are all within 30 feet of where my character, and it's going to apply to the next demonstration. And that is going to be the wisdom-based saving throw. This Meanlock 2, which is currently off screen on your side here, there we go, is going to attempt to force everyone here to fear them. That means that they're going to go through and target all of the characters that they haven't got targeted. And technically that advantage on the saving throw is also on your character, which it already is, so never mind. Oh wait, it's not. There we go. Oh. And did I miss somebody? Yes, I missed this one. Okay, so there we go. All right, so I've now got all of the creatures in question targeted by the Meanlock. I'm going to force that wisdom-based saving throw. And crap, that's a lot of dice. That's because of the advantage. Pretty much everybody managed to succeed. Yep, pretty much everyone managed to succeed. And you will notice that the wisdom-based saving throw dropped in relation to that. So that's exactly how this works. It's either going to help your companions succeed or fail on their wisdom-based saving throws. There is a minor correction that has to be made to the resistance. There should be no spaces between each of these values, and it's not magical, it's magic. That should fix the resistances that you may realize are not working. And I can show that now because if I go ahead and drop the damage that is a slashing damage type, we should see that we see partially resisted here in the chat log, which we do. Excellent. That means it's working the way that we need it to. The only other thing that is going to have to go through and get set up is that this particular feature does require a rest period. So you do need to set it up for 1 daily use. And that is because as part of the feature's description here, you must finish a long rest after you've used this particular effect. So once it's used, it goes away from your list. I've always liked the idea that paladins of this class specialization are meant to represent, and until the Swords Coast Adventurers Guide was released, that representative of the crown, if you will, in society was simply missing. That ability to intentionally protect the cities and the lands around them and get much more involved in the political aspects of it make this particular class specialization a little bit more interesting than other paladin classes. This is a nice feature, and it fills a significant gap that reminds me of the likes of Sparhawk or even Mandarelian from many of the David Eddings series of novels. And I'm not sure if I got Mandarelian pronounced right, but I hope I did. However, this does bring us to the end of this particular video. I hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I want to thank you for watching this video, and if you found the information useful, click on that like button as well as leave a comment below, as it helps the channel gain exposure. Also, consider subscribing, as I release content similar to this topic quite regularly on the channel.